Well, like I've told a lot of people, although Christmas is for boys and girls, toys and trumpets and dollies, Christmas also affects adults. And a lot of things happen during an adult's life that might affect them through many Christmases to come. Now, in this book, they're my American Christmas stories. On page 133 is a story about just such a thing. Now I'm going to turn to it. On page 133, we're going to begin the story of a Santa for Sammy. Now, I want you to understand what's going on here, so please listen up close. But this is a story that talks about love, older people, and the meanings we have for Christmas and what it takes to get from one year to the next. Chapter 1. I first saw him walking down Main Street. I knew he was young. His size gave that away. Plus, he was pulling a small red wagon. The wagon looked much like those radio flyer wagons from my youth. You know the ones. Small, all red, with white wheels, and surrounded by that thin strip of rubber they called a tire. A handle stuck out the front and traveled back towards the wagon. It was firmly attached to the front wheel chassis that swiveled back and forth. Any kid that had one of those can tell you of the innumerable times that handle turned tightly on a downhill run and would spill you and all other contents out on the road. Anyhow, I saw him pulling that small red wagon down Main Street. He was small, that was for sure, but he had a presence about him that you could see from the warm cafe I was sitting at drinking my coffee. I remember well how he was dressed. He was in one of those large jackets that looked like a down pillow, all fluffed up and surrounding your body. Ooh, the coat was dirty silver, with a fake black fur collar that was obviously frayed. He had on one of those caps with earmuffs that hung down from the rim and snapped under the chin. The cap was at one time brown, but wear had created many cracks and was showing more white than brown with its age. Of course, he had on mittens. Not gloves, mittens, and one was securely tugging at the wagon handle as he drew his load behind him. I'm sure, as I think back on it, it was the wagon that drew my attention. You rarely see them anymore. Mostly toys from my youth. Kids these days drag video games around. Wouldn't be caught dead with an old wagon. But there he was, chugging down Main Street, pulling his red wagon behind him. He seemed a boy on a mission, as I watched, his head bent against the wind, his legs in quick march. His small body was straining against the weight of whatever was in the wagon and the wind ahead. I watched as he moved forward and memorized the scene in my head as I relate it to you. I knew even then that this may be worth remembering, and fixed my gaze to study every aspect. As he headed around the corner and out of sight, I returned to my coffee and my thoughts of the day. It was obviously cold. The frost on the window and the steam from my coffee confirmed that. The leaves on the trees that lined this old Main Street had fallen long ago, and the limbs now appeared as black lines against the gray sky. Winter was upon us in a small town far from the world. A town where I believed time had stopped, and I had moved here to stand in its fixed tranquility. I too had come to the winter of my life, and anything that would prolong my life's inevitable passing was a welcome respite. Big box stores had long ago forgotten this location. Cable TV had left when satellite showed up, and satellite had only a few customers. The mere fact there were trees that lined Main Street and the fact that the town had a thriving Main Street was evidence that most of humanity had forgotten this gem. Chapter 2. Well, then again, thriving Main Street would be a bit of a misnomer. Actually, there was the cafe I was sitting in, the hardware store, feed store, and the general store. Doc's was across the street, and you could get your car filled and worked on at Jim's on the corner. The rest of the town and its business district consisted of a few dress shops and a local watering hole. There was the odd antique shop that opened by appointment, but that was about it, that and the county library. A small oasis overseen by Miss Margaret. Chaucer, Hemingway, Shakespeare, and all the great writers of the last century were ensconced in its walls. If the permanence of the town hadn't drawn me to live here, the library would have. Miss Margaret was an avid reader, and over time had built up quite the collection. She not only had all the classics, but most of the newspapers from around the world. True, they were usually a few days late, but what did that matter? It was the substance that was important, not the date of the paper. I would fill up on my coffee at the cafe, and then head over to the library. There I would settle into one of the overstuffed chairs and read and discuss great works with the local gentry until time to close. All for the nominal price of $2 US per year. The great cost of the local library card. And this wonderful oasis was where I was thinking of heading when I looked out on the town and saw the small, chubby little man chugging down the street with a wagon close behind. I finished my coffee that morning and once again headed over to the oasis. The sight of the small boy fresh in my mind. I bundled hard against the cold as I stepped out into the street. Snow had fallen lightly and covered the ground, but the street and sidewalks were clear, having been freshly salted by the local merchants first thing when they came in this morning. The footing being sound, it was only the cold bite of the wind that had my attention. I walked slowly the few yards to the library and grasped the old brass door handle, turned it, and pushed my way into the first room. I was hit by the warmth of the old edifice and quickly turned to close the door. A smile greeted me as I turned back around. Miss Margaret was there to take my coat and once again shushed me with her index finger as I eagerly shed my garment and made my way to the index card system. What joy there was when I first entered this wonderful building, when I saw a lack of computers and beheld an actual Dewey Decimal Card catalog. I had actually walked over to the system, opened the drawer, and let my fingers run softly over the cards. The actual feel of paper. I was in heaven. I was now before my beloved card catalog again. As in days before, I opened up a drawer at random and glided my fingers down to a card, stopping as I saw fit. I lifted the card out of the drawer, copied down the numbers, and I made my way to the stacks to find my cherished companion for the day. I had made it a practice to never look at the title or author of the book. I always waited for the surprise. And today was no different. I was in eager anticipation as I reached my destination and found my book among the stacks. It was as if I was getting ready to greet a new friend. As I felt the hardcover caress my hand, I looked eagerly at the title. I froze. This book could not be here. It had been out of print for years. It was an unremarkable book, but it was my memory, and it hit hard. I left the book on the shelf and stumbled over to the chair next to the window. I felt as I'd been punched hard in the stomach, and woe started to fill my old heart. It was then, in my sorrow and grief, that I looked out a window and saw the small boy staring back at me through the window. The wagon was trailing behind him, yet he just stood and looked at me through the glass as I looked at him. He gave no emotion. Indeed, he could not through the scarf wrapped tightly around his face. But his eyes, his big brown eyes, pierced through the wind, glass, and my pain and held me in its embrace for the few moments it took to regain myself. I looked away briefly, then turned back to the window. The boy was gone. I sat for a few moments, then let my memory turn to the events that caused such sadness. I believed I hadn't thought about them for years, but I now know they had been with me in everything I had done since then. It was Christmas. My child, my handsome Bill, was home from college. His mother, Molly, and I were just ecstatic that he should be there for Christmas. There was no secret he was enamored with a wonderful girl, and soon their lives would be united. We were painfully aware that this meant our Christmases together were coming to a close. Soon we'd be second to her family, and then third to theirs if life had its way. So this was a special Christmas, maybe our last Christmas as our own little family. Oh, we had gone all out. The live tree, the popcorn strands, Scrooge read by a roaring fire in the fireplace. We even spent some time at the local concert listening to Christmas carols. Bill was here for a week, through Christmas Day, then back off to his final months at college and his new life. There just wasn't enough time to do it all. Molly laughed and laughed all week. Bill teased her mercilessly, and I must admit I joined in frequently. To hear his and her laughter in the house, that was what home was. Of course, I was a bookworm then, as I well now. Even wrote a few. We were so proud when they got published, and the few extra dollars they made on the market helped with Bill's education. Bill had inherited my love of books and his mother's love of music. But we're all wondering where his mischievousness came from. I insisted it was from her Uncle Ralph, but she would insist my Aunt Beth was the cause. Knowing both quite well, it was always a drawl as to the culprit. I smiled as I recalled all the laughter. I saw Molly's face clearly in my mind as the memories flooded my brain. Bill's large grin brought an eager response. I silently cried. Tears rolled down my face as I thought of that Christmas and all of the joy. It was Christmas Eve, and Bill had left at noon to do some last-minute shopping. Molly and I were wrapping presents and listening to some old carols on the radio. She was preparing a Christmas Eve dinner. Nothing too fancy. The bird and stuffing were for tomorrow's big day. It started to get dark, and Bill had not yet arrived home. I knew that by 6 all the stores had closed, so I was beginning to worry when the knock at the door came. The knock at the door. Everyone has heard those words. One cannot imagine the dread that the actual act conjures up until it happens to you. All your fear, all your worry, all bundled up in one large knot when you hear that fateful sound. I always thought it odd that you knew. You always knew it was the knock. It just wasn't a friend or colleague coming by. You know what is going to happen, and every fiber in your body tells you not to answer the door. Don't open the door. As if this action alone can freeze time and preserve your happy life. But of course you can't. You walk to the door and open it, and as if some surreal scene from an old grade B movie, they inform you your life has just ended. Of course, they try to be careful. They try to have compassion, but they don't want to be near you as if your sorrow will rub off and affect your secure and beautiful lives. As you can feel this as you move down the corridors of a faceless building with tinsel and sad twinkling lights towards the door marked morgue. They are so careful and so sensitive, and they try so hard to be of some help. But when you identify your handsome boy on a cold, dark slab in the basement of an old building, there's no help to be had. Emptiness is all there is. A gentle hand gave me a Christmas gift, the last gift Bill would ever give. On it was my name. In it was that book. Christmas morning came, and I had yet to fall asleep. The book lay on the table. Molly came to the room. What once had been a tree of happiness, crowded with gifts of joy, was now nothing more than an empty symbol of our sadness. I threw the book in the fire and watched it burn. I blamed it for our son's death because I had no one else to blame. It wasn't 6 months before Molly moved out. The divorce followed shortly. I moved to a large city and devoured my job. I moved up the ladder quickly and stayed quite a while, retiring comfortably. No one else entered my life, and I never looked for anyone. But there was the matter of that little boy with a wagon. Ooh, chapter 3 is next. It's going to be great. Hope you stay with me.